pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. So, are you taking minutes? Mr. Stevenson?
No.
You want me to take minutes?
That'd be great.
I think you thought you said, will you, are you? And you said, will you?
No, I said, earlier I said, are you?
Oh,
And he
okay.
said, yes.
Oh,
And then
Oh, I didn't
just
say
said,
yes.
oh, he said.
I said I was leaving at 8:30.
Oh, good. Okay. We'll get through
But
it.
thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. All right, so all members present except for Greg and Breck. Barb. And minutes of November 17th. Does everyone have those minutes?
No, it's November 18th.
18th? So 17th on the agenda.
Yeah, it's 18th on the minutes.
Which is correct.
I'll have to look at
It
the
was the
calendar.
18th, actually.
Double check.
Oops. 17th.
17th, okay.
So then this is.
So the minutes need to be corrected
Yeah.
to the 17th. So does everyone have those minutes?
Yes.
Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Other than the date being changed?
Who's approved as amended?
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That's 7. Okay. And are there minutes for,
I didn't see anything for the 15th, did you?
So all I saw was these two.
For the first,
Just one.
I mean, the,
first,
yeah, I didn't see the other
no,
meeting.
so we'll table that. All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Board of Education report. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having us. We don't have a lot of change since the last time we were here. We are currently still working on our 16-17 budget, but intend to have it put together and ready for the Budget and Fiscal Committee by the 23rd, so next week. They'll have it to look at over the holiday period, and we'll put it in front of the board at our first meeting in January. So up to this point, Julie created a sustained services budget, which is, opening up the doors next year, doing everything exactly the same. The administrators came forward with their budget request, program needs, and then we've spent the last few days going through and identifying places where we can consolidate and save and put some things together. And we are almost done with that first round. Made a few changes to it, actually took some money out of it today, and we are just about ready to send it to Budget and Fiscal with a cover letter, and they'll have it to present to the board.
Great. Any questions for Superintendent or Julie?
can you tell us who your officers are now? Your officers?
Oh, officers of the Board
Board
of
of Ed?
Education?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kelly Kennedy is the board chair. Joanne Sullivan remains as the assistant chair, and then Karen Broder remains as secretary.
Is there anything to report on current year? You'd like to?
Current year is really very much status quo from our last update. Insurance has been our favorable account this year, so that's the area where we are able to hold those monies in reserve right now. And we know that every year special education has its ebb and flow, and that is the one place that we kind of stay as conservative as possible on any surpluses that we have currently in our budget, because we never know if we're going to need those funds for those special ed expenditures that might come our way. A couple of pending possibilities, so we'll keep you posted. We always try to keep you updated if those come along and we incur any additional cost for special education. So that's, the bottom line is in a favorable position at this point.
And current contract negotiations, are they still ongoing?
Yeah, we are heading into mediation with para-educators the first week in the year. And we'll be starting secretaries negotiations in the next couple of months.
Okay.
Does the secretary's negotiation include the executive secretary?
It does not, no.
And is there any activities on the turf field at this time of the year, or they've been ceased because of the year?
Punch list work, the punch list has been created, and we're watching emails go back and forth about getting that work done.
But there's no school functions or activities on
Oh,
the
I'm
field
sorry,
at this time? Okay,
No.
thank you.
Any other questions? Board of Ed? All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you for coming.
Happy holidays.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
holiday.
Thank you.
Okay. The heart and hypertension discussion with Attorney McQuaid. Thank you for coming.
Good evening, thank you for having me. My name's Joe McQuaid from the law firm Kanan, Escalera, and McHale. I have been representing the town in a number of cases filed by police officers over the years for heart and hypertension benefits, which are provided for in the Connecticut General Statutes at Section 7-433C. These benefits are similar to workers' compensation benefits, but the main difference is that no one has to prove that the hypertension or the heart condition occurred in the course of their employment. As long as they are employed, they can get these benefits if they become disabled within the meaning of the law while they're employed as regular uniformed police officers, regular uniformed firefighters. For Old Saybrook, we're only concerned with the fire department as of now.
Police
Department, excuse me, thank you. This law has been on the books for many decades. It has changed a little bit over the years, and most recently in 1996, it was capped so that people who start on or after July 1, 1996 are not eligible for these benefits. They would be only eligible for workers' comp benefits under the workers' comp statutes. One of the interesting features to me anyway is that workers' comp benefits are generally not considered income, they're not generally taxable, but the heart and hypertension benefits are taxable to the employee because there's no reason, there's no connection to the job necessarily, at least within the view of the courts so far. The other feature is that because they are not connected with the workplace necessarily, they're not insured. So I'm not aware of any company that would insure the heart and hypertension benefits. There are some companies who may be third-party administrators, but nobody insures them. So the proceeds have to come out of each town's budget. So this is a problem that is faced by all municipalities, and because obviously the municipalities banded together in 1996 and were able to put the cap on the law, but we continue to have claims running, particularly as folks age and start, and I find that once you hit the age of 40, and this is not medically based on a study or anything, but once you hit the age of 40, I think it's not too hard to come down with hypertension, which is really just consistent high blood pressure. It's not difficult to do in this day and age. So I think throughout Connecticut you find that there are a lot of police officers and qualifying firefighters who file claims, and it's not uncommon for a police officer to file a claim shortly before retirement. They have to get it in before they retire, and that's what happens. So this liability can grow and grow. Although the claims themselves are not technically workers' compensation claims, they follow the same compensation rules. So there are periods of time for which someone who qualifies is eligible for certain types of benefits. So just as under the workers' compensation statutes, there could be an officer who's out with a temporary total disability, and they'll be getting those benefits during however long that period lasts. And then there are other benefits called permanent partial disability benefits. So if the officer goes to his or her physician, gets a rating from the physician saying you are 20% permanently partially disabled, then there's a formula for paying out those benefits. The difficulty with the law is that over time, people can come back and say, so the first time they collected on the permanent partial disability benefits, let's say that's 20%. Well, down the road, they can go back to the doctor, and that may be now a 40% permanent partial disability, and we pay that. And then if they die from heart or their heart and hypertension condition, and some would argue that you're dead when your heart stops, so that they would argue that any time anybody dies, it would be associated with that. There are certain survivor benefits. So the benefits often can outlive the officer himself or herself, and over time, that becomes difficult to provide. Another difficult feature of the law is that while someone is receiving these kinds of benefits, so let's say they have the 40% or they've gone back for the 40%, for that period of time when they're receiving those benefits, the municipality is obligated to provide them with health care that is equivalent to what they had when they either retired or were injured. So as we all know, healthcare is changing at such a rapid pace, and it seems like there's no end in sight to the changes that will be occurring. That can become an expensive proposition.
Could you expound on that a little bit? I'm not sure I followed that.
Sure. For some municipalities, if they do not have retiree benefits,
Okay, so we
have some
sunsetted it, but we have, go ahead.
Yeah, so we have certain retiree benefits, but let's say that someone was filed a heart and hypertension claim, they retired, let's say, it could have been in 1990. Let's say they retired in 1990, they've gone back to their doctor, they have additional benefits, and let's say for that period that they're getting the initial those benefits, the town is obligated to provide them with similar equivalent insurance coverage. And now the coverage in 1990 is going to be, in most cases, vastly different than what it is today. So there may be the case where in 1990 there weren't any co-pays, for instance. And so the town might be on the hook, if the retiree has health benefits, to pay those co-pays or something along those lines. There are some places where there are no retiree health benefits. Obviously, that becomes an expensive proposition. So these claims have a tendency to go on over the course of many decades. And so at the beginning of the claims, what we do is we try and gather as much information as possible to see whether one of the few defenses available to any of these claims would apply. And we look at those and see if the town is lucky enough to have a defense. Often there is no defense to these claims. And then after that, we go from there. So,
Could you give an example of a defense, what a defense might be?
sure, one of the most common defenses, well, there are a couple of defenses. One is that under the statute, if there was a physical exam at the time of hire, and that physical exam revealed hypertension or heart disease, that would be a defense. Now, what you normally see is that the write-up of the physical exam is long gone. You can't find it. It's presumed that it was fine. And then when you do find it, most people who are starting in these jobs, at least before 1996, are young people. So they don't have these issues for the most part. It's very rare you'll see that. Another common defense is that under the law, the officer has basically a year to file a claim. And the question is, a year from what? Well, that has been changing under the law, but if the officer goes to his or her doctor and the doctor says, you have hypertension, well, that starts the clock running. If the doctor says, oh, you got high blood pressure, I want you to go out and exercise some more, that does not start the clock running. That's relatively new law that the Connecticut Supreme Court decided. So those are the kinds of defenses that we'll be looking for, particularly in the medical records, to see if it's been documented that the person had heart disease or hypertension.
Do they have to do that within a year of their termination, and do they have to retire, or they just have to leave the force with hypertension?
They don't even have to leave the force. So they have to become disabled within the meaning of the law. And I use the quotation marks under disabled because generally if an officer has been diagnosed with hypertension, which those standards have been lowered over the years, and as obesity epidemic in this country grows, it's easier and easier to get hypertension. Then, and the doctor puts them on an antihypertensive medication, which you'll see a large segment of the population is on, then they're disabled. So even if one has a disability of hypertension, one can still work as a police officer. And I've had one doctor tell me that if someone has a 60% permanent partial disability because of hypertension or heart disease, often those people can still work, are still fit for duty as police officers, so they can continue to work.
But can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What is the liability for the town, though, when somebody is diagnosed with a situation, and then we still have them as an officer, and then they go into a crime scene, and then something happens, and then you got a big multi-million-dollar lawsuit on your hands? I just don't understand where the town is.
So is your question, if you have an officer who's been classified as disabled
Right.
under the law, we gotta talk very general here.
Right.
And you're saying if that officer, as a result of that classification, perhaps has a heart attack?
Right, exactly.
In a tense moment.
Right.
You own it. I mean,
Yeah,
And then what would happen if the other officer said, I don't want that guy backing me up?
These are difficult questions that, in my opinion, the law has not answered sufficiently to my opinion. There's a difference between having a permanent partial disability and being declared fit for duty. And it's often difficult to get a doctor to say that someone is not fit for duty. In the example that I gave, the doctor once told me, if you're 60% permanently, partially disabled, you're still fit for duty. So that is a difficult question.
You probably wouldn't hire a person with that disability if they came in for physical. You probably wouldn't hire them.
No, I'm not asking that question.
No, but I mean, it's two different, it was the same
You
thing.
wouldn't hire them.
No, so I mean,
Right.
But they're on your force at this point. They're 20 years on your force. That's,
So what personal responsibility does the individuals have to take care of their health, that they don't are 50 pounds overweight or whatever?
That is a difficult question as well. I know that there have been efforts over the years to negotiate into contracts, fitness standards and the like. And it's not surprising that many unions would oppose that. Some will agree, and there are standards, but they're probably not, in my opinion, not the standards that one might expect sitting in your seat, so to speak.
do you collect heart and hypertension while you're still collecting your salary and working?
Yeah. Oh well.
Is that in addition to your pay, or is that?
I'm going to say it's a qualified yes, depending on what benefits you're getting. So the most common benefits we've been discussing are the permanent partial disability benefits. At that point, the officer has reached what they call maximum medical improvement. The officer is fit for duty or is not. I'm assuming that officer is fit for duty. Officer comes back, is working full time, and is collecting on top of his or her salary these permanent partial disability benefits. If the officer, in the other situation, if the officer is out on temporary total disability, well, they're collecting those benefits and aren't fit for work.
so the answer is yes.
He's 50%.
If I'm an officer and I go to the doctor and I have a 10% disability because I have high blood pressure, I can continue to work, and if that has been declared, I can get payments.
I get a 10% increase in my pay.
Do they have that for personal?
But it's workers'
Depends on
comp,
the
it's workers' comp, so there's a formula. So 10% may equal 48 weeks, or
52 weeks.
52 weeks.
And let's say, just for round number purposes, the formula works out to $1,000 a week. So, they're getting $1,000 a week over 52 weeks in that.
In addition to their pay.
And then it ends?
Well, that ends, and then they are entitled to additional benefits in many cases. And then, again, they can go back to their doctor at some point, and the doctor may say, well, your condition has worsened, and now you're entitled to another 10%, and we start that process again.
How do other towns, I've heard of other towns settling these things and they're done.
Yes.
Tell me the procedure on that.
There is a procedure or an agreement called a full and final stipulation. And that full and final stipulation is one in which the municipality and the officer agree to a certain benefit package, usually payment of monies, and they agree. It's usually for a very large sum of money to most folks, and that's paid, and then you don't have the coming back with additional disability, you don't have the survivor benefits and things of that nature. So the question is, what is a reasonable settlement, and will people agree to it? There are many different settlements that are out there. Some just decide, well, we're going to give benefits for the rest of this person's life. There are others that are contained, and I don't want to get too far into this topic, because then we get into strategy, since I am defending some of these suits, but there is a way to do that.
I have a question, Dave.
Go ahead.
You represent many communities, and Generally speaking, are there more claims for full-time fire departments than there is full-time police departments?
These days, I don't think so. I think now we're at a point in time where a lot of firefighters and officers are aware of it, so many of them tend to file.
What's
And
the,
since '96, more officers, fire and police become more aware of their health issues and things, and that reduces that issue also some?
Some, I mean, I think also, you know, since 1996, and I'm not a doctor, I think that the incidence of hypertension in the population has gone up, so you see more and more people.
I thought after 96, they weren't eligible.
Well, I'm just using 96 as a demarcation point. Those who were eligible, those who had started before.
Or 96 are now applying after 96.
Yeah, I think in 2015, where we are now, you'll see there's probably a higher incidence of hypertension than there was 20 years ago or further back.
what is the, is there an overall general percentage that, overall, say in the state of Connecticut, that these officers are filing this?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't seen any numbers on that. I think it's a pretty high percentage, but I don't have exact figures.
What do these major cities do with it? They might have literally hundreds of officers. Must be
I'm not an expert on their finances and what they do. In my opinion, there are a lot of places that have not planned very much for this. And so it tends to be that budgets kind of lurch back and forth as a result of when you get the claims and when people, if you have someone who has a very high, permanent partial disability rating, these things hit and they can hit hard.
Yeah, but if you're a town, say a city, and you have a budget for this, isn't it hard to defend that we can't pay this or afford that when we have X amount of dollars sitting there for that?
It becomes difficult,
Yes.
certainly.
Right.
And it depends on how well certain cities budget, which is another topic entirely.
Okay.
Could you describe the secondary injury fund and if in fact that gets involved with the heart and hypertension?
It does, well, I can tell you it doesn't. So it's involved in the workers' comp side, but I have not seen the second injury fund involved in any heart and hypertension claims. I don't want to say that it could never happen, but municipalities don't usually declare bankruptcy or anything like that. So.
I want to make sure I understood what your question was a little while ago in terms of if you have budgeted for it. I don't believe, are you saying that if you have properly budgeted for it, that has an impact on the ability to pay like a workers' comp
No.
judge? I think that was the question.
Well, that was my question, and I thought he gave me the answer.
Yeah, he did. That's why,
Well, the liability itself rests with the municipality.
I mean, isn't it kind of like, you got $1 million in the account, and then you can't say to the judge, we can't afford it, you got the money there for it.
But you can't say to the judge you can't afford it anyway.
Right.
Exactly.
So,
Affordability is not a defense.
Affordability is not a defense.
I mean, a judge isn't looking at, like, if a town gets hit, and Joe can correct me, I'm not arguing with you. If Bridgeport, my understanding was towns like Bridgeport and New Haven bonded for this stuff because they had such massive liabilities. But these cases are, let's say you have a trial or a settlement, they're before a workers' comp commissioner,
Correct.
Administrative judge of some sort. An ability to pay because the town has a sinking fund isn't a piece of evidence that comes in.
Right. Right, I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
And I'm not trying to
I'm glad
override.
you brought it up.
Yeah, I'm not trying to override what you have. I want to make sure you get to the bottom of that if you want to keep digging. But there's no way that would ever come into even workers' comp court, which is kangaroo court. That's on film.
Two
In my
films.
opinion. I've just, you know, it's not,
So-
it's not a court of law. It's an administrative court that operates a little differently.
So if Bridgeport had $50 million in an account, or they had 0 in the account, the claim would be the same.
Exactly. And I,
Don't you think though, that from the street level though, that it would be, in other words, it's like, the money's there, let's grab it, versus the money's not there, and then it's in the paper that an officer from a city got an award of X amount of dollars. I would be ashamed to walk around that town personally, or city. You know, it's just, you know, when the money's there, you know, it's funny money,
Still money.
but when it's not there, it becomes, you know, second thought.
So there's two ways to look at that from where I sit in that office. Am I trying to prepare the town for an unfunded liability, an unfunded large liability, which you guys know and you know, we've moved this catastrophic illness fund off budget, and it's become a sinking fund because we have a liability, and I'm trying to prepare the town for it when I'm not here, because it may not be me that's here in 5, 10 years, 15 years it could be. Whether that money's there or not, I know what you're saying, but when you're within the 4 walls of the workers' comp court, that money doesn't come into play. The town would have, if the money's not there, the town's gonna have to go into its undesignated fund to pay that claim. In my opinion, that's my opinion of what would happen.
yeah, and to reiterate what Carl was saying, is that because there's a formula, the amount of the judgment, let's call it, is going to be, it is what it is. Whereas in other types of claims, you know, I was discriminated against, I was retaliated against, or whatever, those claims have no set value, so to speak. So I think that your concern might be applicable to something along those lines. But for these kinds of cases, it's a formula, and it is what it is. I know I've gone, I've had other towns send me to, you know, the workers' comp commissioner and say we don't have any money for it, and the answer is, well, tough. It is what it is.
So we're putting money aside, we don't know if that's enough or not enough, or where it's at.
We don't.
Do we know how many people we have that are gonna fall under 1996? And the real question is, most of those guys are filing as soon as they retire. They have right up till now.
Don't they have to file before they retire?
Well, yeah, I've had, not in town here, but in other places, you know, the day before somebody's retiring, oh, here's the claim, next day.
And so far, that's held true. So how many people do we have in that mode? How many more would you have to go?
So, without getting into specific officers, we have officers who are currently working who have received, for instance, that year's worth of benefits.
Yep.
And we have officers who are retired who we paid and will likely come back at a later date. And to answer your first question, yes, we're putting money aside, and yes, we have no idea what any future liability will be. In this year's budget, I'm not going to propose an increase. And I'll explain that at a later date. But I think right now we have, I'll say it, you know, we have about 100, I think about 140,
141.
about 140 if you look at your off-budget accounts. And so I'm probably going to keep it level funded because we've been unable to, we haven't settled any recently. So, and you'll be the first to know if I do. Of course, I'll come in here. So.
Any other questions?
It's a,
Do
look,
you qualify under that, Tom? You used to work before 96.
No comment.
It's difficult. I mean, it is not, it's not Old Saybrook's problem, and
Nice.
my understanding is in 1996 it was repealed because it was such bad law.
Far be it from me to criticize the wisdom of the legislature. I would imagine that is the reason that they did it. It's, when you talk about heart disease and hypertension, they're almost antiquated terms now because the science has come so far. It's something that doesn't fit our current reality, in my opinion.
So this is something I've talked to you guys about several times in terms of the proposed firefighter cancer presumption bill that's out there, that was out there the last session that did not pass, and that would apply to volunteer firefighters as well as paid firefighters. There are some qualifications that firefighter would have to meet in terms of over the course of 10 years, how many buildings did they enter into that had smoke, and then last year in a negotiation, they tried to narrow the type of cancers, but it's 12. It's like 12 cancers, including prostate cancer. I mean, if we went around the table, probably a few of us already have it and don't know it. So
You were a
it's,
fireman too, right?
so that bill is something, it's the exact same thing. It is not insurable, and it is going to be a claim that if that legislation passes, be under our catastrophic illness fund. That's where any claims would have to come out of. It's wonderful that we want to provide these benefits to our public safety community, firefighters or police, but when you just throw it on a town and say you can insure it, but you're going to have to pay it, and the state offers no help on the other end, that's why the municipalities band together and go to the legislature and say you cannot do it. Follow that debate very closely this year. There's going to be a lot of pressure to pass that bill. And we all stand up there and say, you did this and you repealed it in 1996, and now you're coming back with another one. So it concerns me as first selectman.
You're gonna be coming back for teachers pretty quick.
Just superintendents.
Never happened. Never happened.
Couldn't possibly have high blood pressure.
No,
That's 30 kids, no problem.
we're very zen-like over there.
I'm happy that Mr. McQuaid was able to come out
Yes.
tonight, and that Carl, and gave him enough incentive to have him come here tonight.
We've been talking about this for years, actually, to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
this explained by Joe down here, and it now came the right moment. Anything else that we should know?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but if people have questions, let me know.
Yeah, I mean, very available to talk to any of you guys if you have a question, so.
All right, well,
Thank
thanks
you.
very much.
Thank you very much. Sure.
Do you represent individuals, by the way?
I do not, no, we're just employees.
Are you gonna go back and try and get these up?
Once a year.
I think if you wanted to, at another point, we could, actually, the few times that I've come here and named individuals, I've done it with Joe's permission. I've said, Joe, can I talk about this case in public session? And I have spoken about particular officers and settlements. But the question has been asked before, and I think the number of officers who are eligible for this, I think we know what it is. I think we're forgetting what it was, because I think the chief is.
Or you wanna
What is it?
No.
What is it?
9.
It's-
It was 9.
9 more to go, or 9?
No. Total
It was
of
9
9.
in the beginning, I believe.
That's
Okay.
probably, can't be much, if it was 9 in the beginning, it's 9 now, because
All right, okay. I
it's
just wanted an idea.
pre-96, so,
Yeah. You mean round 2 or whatever?
well, yeah,
Yeah.
so, there you have
Yeah,
it,
I believe it was
yeah.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Treasurer's report
Thanks for
with
coming down.
regard to the WPCA off-budget accounts.
Yes. You have your list of non-budget accounts, right?
I got it with me, but-
Let me start this just by,
You won't need it, there's only
yeah,
3 or
There's
so.
only, let me just start
We
by
can talk about it.
going down the 3 and explaining what they're for, and then if you have questions, Gracia is here to answer questions if necessary. Okay, the 3 non-budget accounts that we have that are associated with WPCA are the 210 fund, which we call the sewer avoidance fund. The reason for that is and has been just to provide working capital for doing the septic system work without our having to borrow funds to do that work. The way that works is that we spend that money to do the work on the septic systems. We send a bill to the state clean water fund and they reimburse this account. Okay? That's provides us just the working capital.
Is that 100% reimbursement?
That's,
I beg your pardon?
Is that 100%
All right, let me
reimbursement?
Yes,
stop
it
you for a second. If we start on this, I'll never get through them. Let me do the 3 accounts,
First.
and then we'll go into
Well,
the
when you said
questions.
reimbursement, I just didn't want to assume 100%.
I understand. Okay. Let me just go through the accounts first, all right? Otherwise, we'll get bogged down. All right, another one was the 366 fund, the small cities loan. That was early in the process, a grant fund from the state for people who couldn't afford the 50% cost of this program. You know, the program has a 50% homeowner cost, 25% town, 25% state. But when a homeowner couldn't afford that 50%, they made application to this grant fund and they received money to do that work. The reason there's still a lot of money in it is because when that happened, there was a lien placed on the property, and when the property was sold, that money came back to the fund. And so the fund is still there, and it's, as we go into more phases, a person can still make application for low-income.
so this money is only, oh, go ahead, finish up, then I'll go.
What's the balance in that account? If you don't-
$48,000.
Yeah, 48K, yeah.
Plus 6.
366?
You just got 6 in from a house you just sold, right?
366.
My neighbors,
366. Yeah, I just received a check today
so it's
for over
$54,000.
$6,000. I think it's 24 Southview Terrace.
I know where it is.
So,
Okay.
Bob,
Yeah,
just the date on your report?
the one I'm going through is still the same one,
November 13th?
the October 31st.
I'm
Right.
looking at an old report. Never mind. All right, go ahead.
Okay, and finally, there's the 368 fund, which is a pass-through account for homeowner assessments. And what I mean by that is that when work is being done on a homeowner's septic system, they are assessed a certain amount. That money is sent to us, put in the 368 fund, and it's a pass-through account in the sense that we then pay a monthly assessment bond payment to the state to the tune of $18,500 a month. Okay?
Okay.
Sure.
I
go
want to
ahead.
interrupt you because I.
That's all right, go ahead.
Okay, so there are 2 bonds from the state of Connecticut. There's a general obligation bond, which is the town's portion. Everybody in this room pays on the general obligation bond, which is 25% of the cost.
So that's our bond, not
That's the
state's.
town's bond.
Right.
It's in our budget. We
Right,
budget for
right.
it.
Yeah.
It's in our operating budget,
That's how we pay our 25%.
okay?
Yep.
That account that Bob's talking about is, there's a GO bond, general obligation bond, and an SA bond, a special assessment bond, okay? And that is
The 368.
when people who have had their septic system in there, when they're making their payments, it's going into that account. We still pay that special assessment bond with a Town of Old Saybrook check
Yeah.
to the state of Connecticut.
That's why I call it a pass-through account.
All right, so I just wanted to let you know, there's 2 different bonds. One
So-
is the homeowner's portion and one is the town's portion.
So when you say when homeowners make their payments, so let's just say I have my septic system replaced, and my obligation is X number of dollars. I can make payments on that, or I can pay it all at once.
Both.
Either.
Either one.
They are, a bill goes out every April with 2 payments per year, one in May and one in November.
Right, but if
But it's a 20,
I'm making things up. If it's $10,000, I can write out a check for $10,000 and it goes into this fund.
yes, you
Sure.
can.
Or I can make payments that are, whatever, $1,000 twice a year.
You can
Okay.
do, the base is 2% of your $10,000 over 20 years. There is no prepayment penalty, so you can pay in whole or in part at any
Regardless.
Question's been
time.
answered.
The money
So-
goes into that
Yeah.
account.
Okay.
Okay, when it goes in that account, does it stay there, or does it go out after you pay off your bond? Or does it stay in there?
The
Stays in-
money that comes into this is accumulated. You notice the
Okay.
balance is over 400,000. That is the money that is used to pay the $18,500 per month assessment bond to the state. And you just.
And that payment's gonna go up as we incur more costs in that bond,
As
right?
we go to new phases, that will go up.
Sure, well, it's
Yes.
the
But
50%
they'll
piece.
hopefully will collect it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so,
Now, is there an interest rate of 2%? I heard you say 2%.
these are clean water funds, so they're all 2%, 20 years.
Yes, that's where the number comes from the chart that they send us, said this, or that we negotiate. Says this is how much we
So the
have to
person-
pay each month for 20 years.
So do they pay, is it an amortized loan, or is it 2% on the balance? And then
It's
they-
It's
amortized.
It's
amortized.
amortized, so it's like a 20-year loan.
Yes, it is.
I have a
2%.
20-year chart.
Okay?
On the small cities grant that you're talking
Okay.
about, you've got, now you're up to 54,000. That thing just looks like it will continue to grow until everybody's paid off. Is that true?
Yes, and it is our money because it was a grant. It's only increased to this level recently. We went a number of years where the balance was $6,000, then all of a sudden we've had a spate of real estate sales. At some point in time, a decision will need to be made as to what you want to do with this money. It is not restricted funds.
Hmm. But for now, it's available for.
But you're not making any payments out of this?
None.
No,
none
that's it,
whatsoever.
there's just money that's in
It's
there, continues to grow until
in case
everybody...
somebody wants to apply for a low income.
Okay, so at some point you probably have more money than you'd ever dream of people applying for.
But it
that
does
sort of
not, I want to clarify that it does not need to be associated with septic.
We could buy a police car with it.
What are you, trying to stir it up?
I'm just trying-
Well,
As an example,
How about a boat?
we don't want any votes.
So, all right, just to that point, what would it have to do if we want to release money out of this account? What's the process we have to go through? Who controls it?
We would have to prepare a program with rules and regulations and procedures and protocols.
Who is
if-
we?
So
The
there is no.
PCA or the Board of Selectmen?
Carl, if,
Well,
It's
when
rules of account we
I,
want to make sure we got a handle on, it's not just gonna,
no, when I first started, this grant was being, administered by Youth and Family Services. And Mike Pace decided that it made sense to bring it over to the WPCA. And we completed the grant paying for installations of septic systems. It may be that it would be appropriate at some point in time to see if it was feasible to fund some special program for Youth and Family Services. The
so
point
is it a
is,
Youth and Family Services grant that went to
no,
WPC?
it's a grant to the town of Old Saybrook, but it
But for no
was
specific reason.
administered by Youth and Family
Hold on,
Services.
hold on.
This is too much.
No, it's not, Gracia, you're not answering, hold on, just, the grant was originally for low-income folks
Right,
for septics.
right.
that was being administered by Youth and Family Services.
Just have
Okay.
a chance.
All right,
I
so,
want to keep the amount that's
Yes.
there now for a while,
so
Yeah.
till as we go through the other phases in case people need the money.
that's
For the
correct.
same purpose.
So I would say this money shall be used for people in the program
Right.
who perhaps meet the circuit breaker, the state circuit breaker level, where we give a tax credit every year of $75,000 total to the town for people who meet a certain income level, and they get a tax break. If one of those people were to apply and not want to do 2% 20 years, perhaps we could put a lien on the house and pay for their portion of it.
Right.
So I would say that this fund should be restricted for those purposes.
I do too.
Okay, well, that,
But when it gets to use, how do we know when it's gonna be used and what it's gonna be used for? Who controls that? Because obviously,
it would need to be probably done by the WPCA, and we can use the same protocols that were used by Wagner and Associates, who did the administrative portion
Yeah.
of this. I would remind you that we do have an ordinance that provides relief to elderly and disabled residents within our WWMD program. And the net effect of that is that the principal amount of the money they owe for the installation is set aside until the house is sold. And their 2% 20, they're still billed, but they're billed interest only. So, for example, if I think $5,000 comes up to about $180 twice a year. With the ordinance, that rolls back to about $18 to $20 twice a year.
So I would suggest that under the right circumstances, the WPCA, which would have the intimate knowledge of the person who might request this, would make a recommendation, and it would come either to the Board of Selectmen or through the WPCA, and it would get approved through the accounting
I
process.
just wanna make sure there's a process, because I didn't see a
It would,
process.
it would definitely be through the
The
WPCA.
Huh?
It would be through the WPCA. It might come to the Board of Selectmen after. I don't know, I don't recall doing one, to be
Well,
honest.
that's my point, because I haven't
Well,
seen the WPCA, and for them to have the ability to use that money without any other oversight is ridiculous.
Well, no, I understand what you're saying, and as far as procedure, in order to qualify for the ordinance, there's an application process. It requires copies of last year's 1040, along with copies of what they get for Social Security, and there's a whole package put
That's if they
together.
were using it for a sewer program, but if you're telling me it can be used for other programs, I'm a little
Right.
But
concerned.
the
So-
requirements for, the original requirements for the small cities grant for people who applied for that is very, very similar to what we're doing for they required virtually the same documentation, because it is an income-based
Yeah, I
program.
understand. I
and it
understand the
would remain
qualifications. I
an
There's no
for usage
reason,
as
first of
well.
all, they have no reason to use this money right now. And I get where you're coming from on this, like what would stop them from using it a certain way? Other than the board would, in theory, say, hey, listen.
Well, I've been to all those meetings, they haven't done that. so-
Right, right. They haven't spent the money. They haven't spent this money. And that money should be used, Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen would agree that it should be used under certain circumstances for elderly and disabled. And
Is that anywhere in town or just within the district?
Anywhere.
Anywhere
That
in
one
town?
is anywhere.
Plus, this is subject to the same system as everything. Any check that would go out would have to be signed by the selectmen.
I was surprised that it's as high as it was, because I know it was a lot lower than that.
Yeah,
so.
it's quite sudden. It's within the last
Yeah,
year
so
and a
there's been
half.
some sales. So really, there aren't, I mean, there's only three off-budget accounts, Bob?
Yes.
No, just tell me one thing, I'm gonna ask you the question, because I was at the meeting. Where did the $4,500 come that paid for 2 lawns to be done that were in phase 1? Where did that come from? What account?
It came from the 210 account.
and that's supposed to be working capital?
Yes.
How did that get to be working capital? And please indulge me a little bit, because phase one was closed out. People had 30 days to, whether to challenge it or not. Those that couldn't afford to challenge it said, well, I can't do any more with it. We've done it with the town, I'm not gonna hire a lawyer. Some of us that were foolish enough to hire a lawyer did, and didn't get very far. These two properties got their lawns done. When I heard people for months on months, talking about their lawns, their driveways, and they never got repaired, they never got satisfaction, they went to be assessed, and all of a sudden, lo and behold, there's $4,500 coming out of this account to pay for those two properties, and I wanna know why.
Did you ask the WPCA?
I asked them, and
And I
nobody
will
seems to
give-
tell me who approved
And I
it.
will give you the answer that I gave you then. The decision was not mine, and you will,
Right.
if you want to know how the decision came to be,
Yeah.
I'm afraid you're gonna have to wait till Stephen gets
Well,
back.
and that's the point.
The
point is-
question, the only question that I was asked, Barry, was, do we have money to pay for it? And my answer had to be, yes, we do. Now, one thing I point out as we trudge through the minutia here is that, as you'll see, if you're looking at the same thing that Bob prepared, there's currently 877,000 in change in sewer avoidance fund.
Mhm.
A goodly portion of that money is grant that need not be repaid. And in the past, there has been some discussion that that some of these non-reimbursable 210 expenditures, of which there are very few, could legitimately be made based on the fact that there is a goodly portion of money in there that is grant money directly to the town of Old Saybrook. That is all I can really add to this as to.
Okay, and I'm not blaming you, I'm just saying, that's an account that's offline, there's not a lot of control on it, yet people fought and argued about stuff that got nothing done, and all of a sudden we can come out with money. They could have taken, if you got 875,000, you could have taken care of everybody that had a problem, and nobody would have gone to court, it would have been done.
Not my decision. I'm
And we
sorry,
spent
Barry.
40,000 with a
I-
lawyer to defend them. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's why I don't like offline accounts. I'm not blaming you, please don't think I'm taking it out on you. It's not a personal issue, it's a procedural issue.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you for coming, Gracie, and if I sound like I'm yelling at you, I'm not. I appreciate what you do. It is my normal, she knows that.
Oh, yes, we do this all the time. I mean,
Did you read all
I
that?
expected it. I wouldn't know what to
Everything you
do if you didn't have something to say.
Just make a note that Brad left at 8 o'clock. Any other questions for Bob with regard to the 3 accounts?
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks very much.
Wow.
Selectmen's report.
So I'm glad to hear that several of you went over to the Youth and Family Services building before you came here. I was over there too. You know, we have an opportunity to, it sounds like, to do it right in there, make some changes in there. And I don't know if Heather wants to speak to anything in the building, or if anybody has any comments.
There's a news story in the paper today.
I know that,
Okay.
yeah. So I think I reported
I
last
didn't see the
time,
paper.
there is going to be insurance coverage for this, right? Did I report that last time?
I thought it was a question of whether it would be or not.
Okay,
I-
there will be, which is good, very good. And, you know, the chief of police deserves a lot of credit for that. He took it early on and looked at some of the files and got Kerma back on the phone and said there appears to be an incident, and they did cover it. So that's a big deal.
Mhm.
It's a big deal because I think if we had done it the way we were gonna do it, it would not have been as exhaustive a makeover. And now we have an opportunity to, not only with some insurance proceeds, really put some new shine on the inside of the building. But perhaps if this board were inclined, we could appropriate I think what's gonna be a small sum of money to put some decent some decent furniture in there. I'm not talking about high-end furniture, but, and that's something Heather's working on. So I'm not gonna say any more about that. I think we'll be before you again before too long, on that. So, yesterday, I'm gonna move on.
Yep.
Yeah,
I heard an amount of $30,000.
I haven't heard that amount.
Well,
Okay.
whatever. The work that's being done starting next week, is it just the remedial part, or do you have any total plan? I mean, for the building itself, instead of doing things piecemeal, what are the plans for the total, I guess, remediation of the building? Because it looked like it needed a lot of work, and even 30 grand to me,
Well, I haven't heard the number, okay?
okay, well, let's.
So, assuming that there's new carpeting and the walls are de-wallpapered and patched and painted, and we get a few new fixtures in there, maybe some new desks, is it gonna be perfect? No. We're also gonna remove both chimneys because there was a leak
Yeah.
through the chimneys. Apparently in the attic, there were a couple broken windows. So did you meet with someone from Tri-State?
I did.
The windows? What else on the interior?
I mean, nothing looked too good to me.
No.
I know, I'm not in the building
Yeah.
business, but I mean, your staircases were wobbly, your floors were uneven. The attic, I mean, that roof from the inside looked pretty bad to me.
No, the roof is fine,
It was just
actually.
It
replaced,
is?
wasn't it?
The roof is fine, yeah,
Okay.
they've looked at it.
And the plumbing I don't know about. I don't know, I would have had somebody go in there and look at the building total, maybe you did this, I don't know. Look at it totally to see what had to be repaired when it's totally vacant now. Now's the time to fix it up
Yeah.
instead of just patchwork, if that's what you're planning. I don't know. I'd like to know what you're planning.
Well, I don't know, they ripped up the carpets today, so there's going to be some remedial work to the floors.
Right, the gentleman, Brian from JP McGuire is meeting with us tomorrow to discuss, they ripped up the carpet and took down all the wallpaper, so now they have a better idea what potentially the next step is. So I don't think anybody has a complete plan yet because it wasn't determined what exactly was gonna need to be done.
But they're gonna look at the total building and see what it needs.
Well, as much as will be revealed
Yeah,
by
I understand,
that,
I understand. Okay.
it's not going to be perfect.
No, it's an
It's-
old building.
It's an imperfect.
Story building.
But I can tell you another thing I did after I met with Heather Monday morning. I called the local contractor to just get a quote on, I called Guy Martino, painter in town. Because if you look at the north side of the building, which faces the firehouse, it's just one big peel of paint. And Guy said, I think it's lead, I have no interest in it. He said, I think they painted, he said, I think you got a lead issue there. He said, I'm sure of it. He said, this was Guy Martino's recommendation. I would pull those clapboards off and just replace them. It'll be a lot easier and it'll be less expensive than dealing with a lead issue. So I was gonna get a quote. That's probably, and maybe address the building on the exterior, maybe over the course of 2 years, not 1 year. I mean, I think, if you had, on the south side, there's trees against it. If it's not perfectly painted that time, but maybe in terms of whatever the budget number is, I thought we'd at least take a look at the north face, which is the worst face, and try to get a quote on that. Obviously, I can get a quote on the whole building too, but that's a much bigger job. I'd imagine that could be 6 figures. I also told Heather in her budget to put a capital line item in her budget, $10,000 a year, just so she can maintain the building. And if something comes up and it's a capital expenditure with the building, she can make the decision to fix it. You know, the building has no capital line item on it, and, you know, that's one thing, a lot of our buildings don't. We don't have, you know, like, we should be rotating, painting these, every room in here, in this building, we're not doing
Just
it.
before you said that, I noticed that wall.
Yeah, so, in any event, John, we'll do our best, and I'll get back to you on that. They are looking at it a lot more closely today and tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Went up yesterday, remember there was a grant we were applying for, $200,000 grant, there was a 10% match, 20,000. Brad was like, no brainer, it was Mariner's Way grant.
Yep.
We went up yesterday, and it was like speed dating. We were at DECD. DECD or DEEP, I can't remember. And there were 5 of them in a room, and there were Christine Nelson, Susie Beckman, a consultant we hired on this project, and we all went up there, and we had 10 minutes to do our presentation. New Britain was before us, Torrington was before us, you know, so they were just getting people in. There were a lot of towns that applied for this money. They had winnowed it down to these towns to be interviewed, so we got past the first cut, and we'll know if we get past the next cut in the new year. This grant is for perhaps new zoning regulations, hire a lawyer if we needed to. It's marketing, it's branding, it's engineering, it's a lot of the stuff, a lot of the soft costs that you need to do to make a place ready for construction. It's not a construction grant. So we were working on that yesterday up at DECD, went up for a 2:30 interview. When we did the lights on the Christmas tree, Steve Bogan of Blastall donated the lift. Mike Macri Roofing had been on the roof of the Cape not too long ago, and he said, you got a couple missing tiles up there. So while we had the lift, he used it and he fixed some of the bad spots on the Cape. I just want you to know that. I don't know what the expense is yet, he hasn't billed me yet, but they had some leaking, and hopefully it will stop because we replaced tiles on that roof. We're not in negotiations. A dispatcher contract expired July 1 of this year, 15, and there's no negotiations set right now, just so you know, on that. You know, we're starting to look at the budget. Bob put out his bond payment schedule. We're down this year, finally. We're 16-17 will be our 3rd year of payments on the police station and the school project. So we're 3 years into that payment already, which is great. And
We're down by how much?
we're probably going to be down 6 figures this year. 90 to 100 grand. Could be a little bit more, or less, depending on how but that's where we are.
Okay.
Which is great news. We're on the decline, which is, so that's kind of a preview of that. That's one number we do know so far. Right, Bob?
Right.
That's fair to say?
It is.
Bob said it must be pretty good. He doesn't say let's do something.
You know, looking at health insurance for next year, and now I got an email from a broker that sends me emails that they think the Cadillac tax is going to be delayed 2 years. We'll see about that. Cadillac tax is a tax of 40% on any health plan, a family plan over $27,500. And there's a lot of plans out there. If you're in a PPO, that is going to be over $28,000. So it's 40% on $1 over and above $28,000. It's not 40% on the whole plan.
Who pays the 40? Who pays that?
Well, good question. And that is the subject of negotiations. obviously you'd like the union to pay for it, and the
To get
union
that
would
kind
like
of
the town
plan,
to
they ought to
pay
be
for it.
paying for it.
I'm sorry?
To get that kind of plan, they ought to be paying the taxes on it.
Yeah, so our plans haven't hit that yet because we backed off to all HSA accounts.
Okay.
So we're not there yet, but everybody's gonna get there eventually unless something else happens, so. But we're working on the health, you know, whatever. We had bad experience again this year, so our initial number wasn't good, but we're working on it. So, I don't have much more.
Quick comment that while I was walking along the sidewalk on Main Street, going over to Youth and Family Services from where I parked my car in the Cape, I noticed that our Veterans Memorial area where the United States flag is half-mast, the lights aren't working.
Oh, the lights aren't working on that, okay. I will,
I mentioned it to you.
okay, thanks. That should be working. So,
Any other questions for Carl?
Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, I should say.
Is there any public comment?
I have a quick kind of comment question. What is the likelihood of the fireman cancer thing going through? Because I'm just thinking, as a liability, we have like, what, 100 firemen? That we're gonna be on the hook for 100 firemen. Do we ever consider going to a paid department with maybe, 20 employees? And we'll be on less of a hook for cancer, which it seems like everybody and their brother has.
It'd be far more expensive
It
from an
would.
operating budget perspective, but,
But the cost of paying for people's cancer treatments.
yeah.
is-
So,
If it goes through.
yeah, I
that's
don't,
all.
so, the lobbyists for that bill that are in favor of that bill being passed say the average cost will be somewhere, or the average cost will be somewhere around $20,000. That's the number they were using. Obviously, that's an average, and you could get one a lot higher, and you get a couple that are a lot higher in any given year. So I'm very happy with our volunteer fire department. If that law passes, we'll adhere to the law. I got some phone calls last year because I was outspoken against it from firefighters all over, not only in Old Saybrook, saying that I wish you would support it. But as an unfunded liability, I can't. If the state wants to help us fund it, I'm all for it. But look at what this position the state's in.
Yeah.
So, but I think we're in great shape with the volunteer fire department. I firmly believe that.
I was just thinking from a liability standpoint.
Our total, yeah. So I'll say no more on that.
Other public comment?
Yeah, I just have a few questions. The heart and hypertension thing, it seems like we probably need to already start planning, because I can probably almost guarantee that the last 9 are gonna apply for this
We
before
are
they
planning.
retire.
We are planning.
But you know what I'm saying, like, you just said it could be up to like $1,000 a week for each person?
Well, I think that was just an example.
Yeah, we've already paid some,
No.
by the way.
Right.
Some have already been partially paid. There's definitely some, and even of those that have been partially paid, there will be future liability with regard to those folks also. I mean, they're gonna come back for that second tranche of money, so to speak. And by the way, I don't begrudge them. It's the law. That's what they're doing. And it's not Old Saybrook. That's not an Old Saybrook comment. That is a Connecticut comment. Police officers do it. It's the law. They're entitled to it. Municipalities pay for it. But getting to your question, we are planning. Several years ago, we created a separate sinking fund that we are funding.
The $140,000.
It's 70 grand a year that we're putting in it right now. So we're up to 140. July 1 will be up over 200. And I don't want to talk about it like it's just going to be this big old slush fund, but we are going to have obligations
I think we are definitely gonna have.
before too long, and we need to be able to pay them without going into our undesignated fund balance.
Okay, and then my next question is, on the youth and family building, with what John was asking, is we couldn't clean up a block building across the street, we leveled it. I think it would be definitely wise to figure out overall what that building youth and family needs. That is a wooden structure, correct? I mean, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that's probably harder to clean up than a block building would be, and I just don't want kids, Heather, her staff, all those people in there, if it doesn't get properly done. Wobbly staircases, I mean, do we look at that whole thing and say, is this building just in such disrepair, or do we piecemeal it and then we have a bigger problem? We leveled that, then we went across, we're behind it, and now we have problems there because we remodeled that building. I mean, would it be in our best interest to get an overall assessment of that building?
I think we're getting that right now.
Okay.
And I can talk to the chief and Heather about that more tomorrow.
Okay.
Look, I hear what you're both saying, it makes sense.
That's it, thank you.
Any additional public comment? Thank you. I have no comments. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
You're
I'll
gonna
see
be
you
able
on
to,
January 5th.
You'll be able to set your budget schedule very soon, because we know it's the first Monday in May, so you work backwards from there, everybody.
Right.
First Monday in May, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So just work backwards from there, and then you have your budget scheduled.
Great. Motion to adjourn? Your second?
Thanks, guys.
Second? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?